I love football. I love fishing. I love ice cream. I love to take long rides in the country with my wife. I love Tilly, our little dachshund. I love cars. I love computers. And on and on. We hear that word love over and over in our lives. But I'd like to talk to you today about the word love as it's found in God's Word in the Bible. And specifically in the New Testament in the book of 1 Corinthians. Paul wrote this letter to the church at Corinth. They were having a lot of problems and struggles, much like churches today. So I don't think much has changed over the years. And he was addressing one subject in chapter 12, the subject of spiritual gifts. It seems they were always arguing about which gifts were the best and which gifts were the most important. And he addressed this subject. In the last verse of that chapter, he kind of sets up the next subject he's going to talk about, which is the subject of love. And in the last verse he says, and yet some of you keep competing for so-called important parts. But now I want to lay out a far better way for you. Then he goes into chapter 13, the love chapter of the Bible. Very popular, very well-known chapter. Many Christians can quote the first 7 verses that talk about and speak of love and its different characteristics. It's often read at weddings. I've heard of people read the whole chapter in weddings when two people are about to commit to each other and commit their love for each other until death do they part. But love, as it's spoken of in this chapter, has very practical, very profitable, and extremely profound teaching with great lessons for life for us. It speaks of God's love, agape, a word that a lot of you are familiar with. The word was seldom used in Greek writing, but it was often found in the New Testament. It doesn't refer to sexual love or romantic love. It's not the word eros, from which we get the word erotic. It doesn't refer to friendship or sentiment. It's not the word phileo, from where we get the word Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Rather, this is speaking of God's love. God's love, agape, is a sacrificial love for others. And it always has to do with, more concerned with giving than receiving. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And so as we look at this chapter, we first find in the first 3 verses that it speaks of the absolute necessity and the extreme importance of love. And Paul says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, the most eloquent speech, angelic speech that you could ever imagine, and have not love, I become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. The wind chimes you can hang in your yard? I love to hear those things at night when I'm sleeping with the window open. I've seen in some stores they have $200-300 wind chimes. Great big, thick, heavy, long pipes. Sound very rich and resonant when the wind blows and it kind of strikes them. My neighbor has a little wind chime. It must only be about this big because it's kind of a little tinkling sound. And it's not bad. It's kind of pleasant, but it's just noise, isn't it? Paul says again, without love, no matter what kind of words you say, you're just making a bunch of noise. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, be very spiritual, understand things of the Bible, have great faith, but if you haven't got love, you're just nothing. Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not love. He doesn't say give some of my goods or most of my goods even. If you sold everything you owned in the whole world to feed the poor and you didn't have love, God's love we're talking about, not man's love, it would profit you nothing. Then in the next 3 verses, he describes 10 things or characteristics about love. The first one is love suffereth long. Now this has the idea of long-suffering means patience. And I think human patience always has a limit. We kind of think of the idea of patience as, well, I'll be patient under this hardship I'm going under right now, under this annoyance that this person is projecting into my life, because it'll soon be over. I'll just be patient until it passes. Let me ask you something. What if the very thing that you're having to struggle with and be patient the most in your life never goes away, never stops. You never get out from under it. God's love is able to be patient with that kind of situation. The next one is love is kind. This has the idea of useful or serviceable, good, pleasant, gracious. Years ago when I was a chaplain in a jail, it was so part of my duties were to pull inmates out of a cell and take them to my office. And I had pulled this one young man out one day and was talking to him about being kind. And he said, I was kind once, chaplain. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, well, one day I was sneaking into this drive-in, for those of you old enough to remember drive-in theaters, and I snuck under the fence, and there was this pretty girl laying on a blanket. She apparently had snuck in too and was watching the drive-in movie. And he said, I got my knife out, and I looked at her, and I thought, I'll just go over there and stick her. And he said, no, maybe I won't. And he said, and I put my knife away. And he looked at me and kind of smiled. And I said, well, what do you mean you were kind? He said, I was kind. I didn't stick her. But this love that God's talking about is kind, has the idea of not the absence of not being unkind. Rather, it's being kind, doing something practical, useful, beneficial, serviceable to someone or for someone. And that's what God's love is. And I'm wondering right now if you have been not unkind, but if you've actually been kind to those you love and been showing God's kindness. The next one is love envieth not. That means to want or desire earnestly what it doesn't have, or to be jealous. Love isn't like that. Love vaunteth not itself, or in other words, doesn't build itself up, isn't vain, doesn't strut around. You know, we have sneaky ways of building ourselves up, don't we? We say, boy, I'm not very good at whatever. I can't do this very well, can I? When really we want people to say, oh, yeah, sure you can. And love doesn't do that. Love doesn't always fish for compliments. God goes on to say, love is not puffed up. This has the idea of not easily flattered, or knows how to receive a compliment, doesn't get swell-headed or big-headed when someone does legitimately say, you're pretty good at that. Love doesn't behave itself unseemly. That has the idea of unbecoming, shameful, uncourteous. I used to know a young lady, she taught us linguistics when I was studying to be a missionary to go overseas, and she used to have a little saying. She said, that's rude, crude, and unattractive. She said that to me and a couple of my buddies all the time. See, love is polite. Love says please, and love says thank you. Love doesn't behave itself in a rude, crude, and unattractive way. And it's such an easy thing to do, and yet it's something that we constantly neglect to do to those we love the most, is show God's love of being not unseemly, but being courteous and being kind. Love seeketh not her own, me first, me, my. Love's not easily provoked, doesn't fly off the handle. Love thinks no evil. You know, we usually assume the worst of people. Sometimes my wife will say, when I get up and start to leave the room, where are you going? And right away I think, what do you want? And I'll say, I get a little irritated. Well, see, God's love doesn't assume or think evil or think the worst of it. God's love isn't like that at all. Love rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Sometimes we can be happy when someone fails or loses or falls. These things ought not to be, should they? We shouldn't be happy when somebody else stumbles, hoping that it might make me look a little bit better. And then Paul sums it up, says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never fails. Love never dies. Love's never out of use. And now abides faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Thank you.